Welcome, dear viewer, to Moby-Dick Abridged, or who cares what Eli thinks about Moby-Dick. I am your host, Eli. Who cares what I think? And I love Moby-Dick. In fact, it's my favorite book of them all of the books. I wish everyone would read it, and if you're watching this, I'm guessing there's a really good shot you're going to feel me when I say this. It's a fucking long-ass book. And not only that, it's also dense as fuck. So long as fuck and dense as fuck. It's not exactly what anyone would call light reading. I totally get that. I think I started reading it like 10 or 20 times before I finally finished it. But guess fucking what? You don't have to read it. You know why? Because you were smart enough to click on this video. I read that shit, so you don't have to. And I'm going to summarize and explain it so you can focus on other, more important shit. Like staying alive, I guess. Making money, eating, shit like that. That, like, makes your life work. Fuck. Felt like a good pitch at first. Sort of got away from me. Point is this. I read book. You watch video. You learn book. No read. Now you smart. Save much time. Win. You winner. The first section of Moby-Dick is a short discussion of the word whale called etymology. We're told that this little leaflet-length section was supplied by a late consumptive usher to a grammar school. And as if that small, seemingly insignificant fact wasn't enough, we get a tiny glimpse into the life of this usher. The pale usher, threadbare in coat, heart, body, and brain, I see him now. He was ever dusting his old lexicons and grammars with a queer handkerchief mockingly embellished with all the gay flags of all the known nations of the world. He loved to dust his old grammars. It somehow mildly reminded him of his mortality. First of all, who is the narrator in this tiny, almost little plaque-length epigram? They refer to themselves only as I. My gut tells me that Melville wanted the reader to, sort of ex post facto realize that this part of the book was written by Ishmael, the narrator of the main body of the novel, in order to afford the reader a better sense of the scope of the narrative, I guess. I assume the same is true with regards to the extract section that comes after this. Anyway, after the blurb about the usher comes the etymology section proper, which opens up with 3 quotations. One from Richard Hakluyt and 2 dictionary entries, strangely enough. All right, here's the first one. While you take in hand to school others and to teach them by what name a whalefish is to be called in our tongue, leaving out through ignorance the letter H, which almost alone maketh up the signification of the word, you deliver that which is not true. Okay, next we have an entry from Webster's Dictionary. Whale, from the Swedish and Danish hval. This animal is named from roundness or rolling, for in Danish vault is arched or vaulted. Next we get Richardson's dictionary entry on whale. It is more immediately from the Dutch and German vallen, as in valien, to roll, to wallow. After the quotations is a list of the words for whale in several different languages, as you can see here on the screen. Anyway, after the etymology section comes extracts. These are attributed to a sub-librarian, a poor devil of a sub-sub, as Melville refers to him, and represent painstaking efforts to collect every passing reference to a whale, no matter how tangential or esoteric, from every book and pamphlet and scroll and cartouche, whatever medium. Doesn't matter, no matter the subject or provenance thereof. The narrator takes care, however, before we get into the extracts proper, of course, as Melville is wont to do, to express his gratitude to the poor devil of a sub-sub and all his poor devilish counterparts for their equally tireless and thankless efforts. In addition to this, Melville reminds the reader, you must not, in every case at least, take the higgledy-piggledy whale statements, however authentic in these extracts, for veritable gospel cetology. Far from it. As touching the ancient authors generally, as well as the poets here appearing, these extracts are solely valuable or entertaining as affording a glancing bird's eye view of what has been promiscuously said, thought, fancied, and sung of Leviathan by many nations and generations. Okay. I won't include all of the extracts here, but I am going to show you a couple of my favorites, just to give you an idea of what sort of extracts this heroic sub was able to find. Let me get a little slurp of coffee here. Okay. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. And what things soever besides cometh within the chaos of this monster's mouth, be it beast, boat, or stone, down it goes all incontinently, that foul great swallow of his, and perisheth in the bottomless gulf of his paunch. That's got to be one of the greatest quotes of all time about anything. He visited this country also with a view of catching horse whales, which had bones of very great value for their teeth, of which he brought some to the king. The best whales were catched in his own country, of which some were 48, some 50 yards long. He said that he was one of 6 who had killed 60 in 2 days. What spermaceti is, men might justly doubt, since the learned Hoffmanus, in his work of 30 years, saith plainly, Nescio quid sit, which means I do not know what this is in Latin. It's a fun one. By art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth or state, in Latin civitas. Or is it civitas? I don't know how to speak Latin. Which is but an artificial man. See, I don't know how that relates. Kind of interesting to think about in terms of what could Moby Dick possibly represent as we move forward throughout the book. Does Moby Dick represent the state in some way? Food for thought. Moving on, the larger whales they seldom venture to attack. They stand in so great dread of some of them that when out at sea they are afraid to mention even their names, and carry dung, brimstone, juniper wood, and some other articles of the same nature in their boats in order to terrify and prevent their too near approach. I like that he says some articles of the same nature, like we're supposed to know what the fuck that means. Thank you, Uno von Troll. Thanks for your service. The spermaceti whale found by the Nantucket. The spermaceti whale found by the Nantucket is an active, fierce animal and requires vast address and boldness in the fisherman. Thank you, Thomas Jefferson. Bonus points for use of the word Nantucket. Never heard that in my life. Just only read it in this book, so points. Old Jeffy, old $2 Jeff. My God, Mr. Chase, what is the matter? I answered. We have been stove by a whale. Stern all, exclaimed the mate, as upon turning his head he saw the distended jaws of a large sperm whale close to the head of the boat, threatening it with instant destruction. Stern all for your lives! Oh, the rare old whale, mid storm and gale, in his ocean home will be, a giant of might where might is right, and king of the boundless sea. So, yeah, it's a pretty strange opening. Why? Why would Herman Melville choose to start his already very, very long novel with all this weird shit about the word whale and all these oblique references to whales from other works? Okay, so I read an article by Gordon V. Boudreau of Lemoyne College. Don't forget Lemoyne College, which discusses many theories about this choice. There is a ton of interesting information in it, so I'll provide a link in the video description, but here's my summary. First of all, we need to pay really close attention to that first quote. So close, in fact, that I'm going to repeat it now and put it back on the screen. While you take in hand to school others and to teach them by what name a whalefish is to be called in our tongue, leaving out through ignorance the letter H, which almost alone maketh up the signification of the word, you deliver that which is not true. Again, pretty fucking weird. But let's make sure that we're aware of this quote, which we're going to call the Hakluyt quote, just to make it easier to remember. For now, we're going to put a pin in it and look at that list of whale words again. A shabam. Here you go. I know this is all really weird, but stay with me on this, okay? The first two entries are this and this, which are supposedly the word for whale in Hebrew and Greek, respectively. I say supposedly because apparently those aren't really the Hebrew and Greek words for whale. And we're going to get to why this is in just a second. And we actually already have a major clue about why these two words are spelled wrong, which will seem painfully obvious when I explain it. But you have to wait just a second, so try to figure it out if you want. Anyway, the more astute among you may have noticed that those languages have something very important in common. They are the languages of the Old and the New Testaments. Now, who remembers the Hakluyt quote? It's all about how H is the essence of the word whale, right? According to Boudreau, in both the Hebrew and the Greek words for whale, Melville's mistake was the addition or substitution of an equivalent H. Boudreau then quotes Dorothy Militsky's, sorry if I butcher your names, anybody, article, The Letter H in Melville's Whale, which claims that in Melville's transcription, the first letter of the word for whale in Hebrew, T, and the word tan, a singular form of the biblical plural tanim, and in Greek K in ketos, are mistakenly turned into H, resulting in Melville's inaccurate forms of han and hetos. Okay. All right. Whatever, Dorothy. Thank you. Boudreau goes on and lists a ton of theories that people have about exactly what these corruptions of the Hebrew and Greek words are supposed to mean before shifting gears a little bit and looking at things from a different perspective. He goes on to quote an article by F.O. Mathiasen? Who knows? The great philologian Jacob Grimm arrived at mythology through his investigation of speech. Words and fables became finally inseparable for him, and he sought their common source in the most primitive and most profound instincts of the race, in its manner of feeling and imagining. It may be said of Melville that he intuitively grasped the connection. In his efforts to endow the whaling industry with a mythology befitting a fundamental activity of man in his struggle to subdue nature, he came into possession of the primitive energies latent in words. Boudreau thinks that by quoting the statement by Hakluyt that H is the essence of whale, Melville is evoking this source most primitive and most profound, which is feeling and imagining. I know this is getting really weird and heady and esoteric, but we're almost to the denouement, so hang in there. Whale, regarded as a printed word in a dusty volume, is a mere counter, a dead word whose etymology, its fossil poetry, as Ralph Waldo Emerson would have it, was compiled by the dead, late Usher. Considered phonetically, however, it is animated, inspired in the radical Emersonian sense, that is, through wind, breath, currents of air. This is because the letter H is an aspirate letter, aspirate being phonetics. 1. The speech sound represented by the English H. Not very helpful. 2. The puff of air accompanying the release of a stop consonant. 3. Any speech sound followed by a puff of breath. Latin, aspirare, aspirare, aspirare. To breathe upon, aspirate. Thus, in the word whale, the H is the spirit and principle of its animation into sounded language. Real quick here, I need to expand on something that they kind of just glossed over in that quote. Okay, Boudreau mentions fossil poetry, which is an idea from Ralph Waldo Emerson. In a note in the article, Boudreau explains, in Nature, which is a book by Ralph Waldo Emerson, Emerson exemplified instances of the fossil poetry of words, one of which is that spirit primarily means wind. Boudreau then points out that usher is derived from medieval Latin ostium, ostium, entrance, river mouth, from os, mouth, orifice, suggests that Melville's late usher is the caretaker of a cemetery of words, formerly oral, now deceased, dead words. Compare that with Henry David Thoreau's statement that a written word is carved out of the breath of life itself. Carve it out of the breath of the wild, if you ask me. So, we're starting to get this idea that words on a page are dead, but spoken words are alive. In one sense, this etymology section, along with the extracts that come after, are Melville's way of saying, listen up, motherfucker. This isn't going to be some boring-ass book to be read quietly. This is a fucking living, breathing, visceral, dangerous story rooted in a mythos as towering and ancient as the Bible itself. You think I fucking chose Hebrew and Greek by mistake? Fuck no. In another sense, though, it prepares the reader for something of what they're going to experience while reading the book. By invoking the literal language of the Bible, Melville is foreshadowing an elevation of the rhetoric of this story to that of biblical proportions. In Moby-Dick, whale was not a dead word in a dusty librarian's antiquated lexicons, but a living word, articulated by aspiration, the breath of life. The full quotation from Hakluyt in the etymology section reads, while you take in hand to school others and to teach them by what name a whalefish is to be called in our tongue, leaving out through ignorance the letter H, which almost alone maketh up the signification of the word, you deliver that which is not true. Thus, Moby-Dick begins with a paraphrase of the opening of St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the letter H that Melville incorporated in both the Hebrew and Greek words for whale was intentional. So it turns out, according to a bunch of fucking nerds, that's the reason why Herman Melville decided to start his greatest work in this way, to essentially put it on a level with the Bible, with a flex whose depth is exceeded only by its subtlety. It also seems to dovetail nicely with the other two quotations from etymology. Remember? The dictionary entries. Both of them assert that the name for whale comes not from some physiological trait of theirs that was particularly noteworthy, but instead from some distinctive behavior. It's as if the thesis of this novel is that whales are verbs incarnate, not mere nouns, and quite honestly, I can't think of a better way to kick off what I consider to be the best book I've ever read. And now, with our expectations properly set and knowing we're in for a story of truly epic proportions, I hope you'll join me next time, dear viewer, in Chapter 1, Loomings.